You don't usually notice it in the moment. The conversation ends, nothing dramatic happened, you move on. And then later, while you're brushing your teeth or trying to fall asleep, it hits. Your mind circles back and you're replaying it. Not because you said something wrong, but because you edited yourself. You held something back. You softened something. In the moment, it felt like you were keeping the peace. But now, there's a quiet irritation just under the surface. Not at them, but at yourself. I'm Suzanne Arjona, and this is Life on Your Terms, where human design meets bold truth and permission to be real. You've played the role, you did what was expected, and now it's time to show up as you. When you notice you've held back or you've softened yourself to make someone else more comfortable or to keep the peace, that's usually a clue. Because most of the time, it wasn't really about what they said. It was about the moment you felt something rise in you and decided not to go there. Maybe you didn't trust your tone. Maybe you didn't want to shift the mood. Maybe you thought, this isn't worth an argument right now. So you let it pass. You told yourself it was fine. And in the moment, that did keep everything smooth. But later, you could feel it was still sitting there because nothing had actually been dealt with. And that's where the solar plexus comes into play. When we're talking about conflict avoidance, we're talking about emotional discomfort. The emotional solar plexus is the emotional center, and how you're wired there changes how you handle tension. Now, I have a defined solar plexus, which means I don't get clarity in the moment. I get a wave. Something rises, it builds, and only later does it settle into clarity. Now, until I studied human design, I didn't understand that. So when irritation came up in the middle of a conversation, I assumed I needed to deal with it right then. If I was speaking from the peak of the emotional wave, it came out sharper than I intended. If I was in an emotional low, I swung the other direction and said nothing. I didn't realize clarity was supposed to come later. So things went unaddressed. And that's where resentment started stacking. Now, if your solar plexus is undefined, it plays out differently. You don't have your own consistent emotional wave, but you feel other people's emotions strongly. So when tension shows up, your body feels it fast. The instinct is to calm it down, smooth it, ease it, move past it. Because once the emotional charge drops, you feel better. But what often doesn't happen is expressing what was true for you in the moment. Now, a defined solar plexus avoids because clarity takes time. And an undefined solar plexus avoids because the emotion feels amplified. Different wiring, same resentment if it keeps repeating. So here's the part to think about. Where is this happening in your real life? Is there a conversation you keep replaying? Something small you told yourself wasn't worth bringing up? Are you calling it being easygoing when you're actually just tired? Have you been waiting for the perfect moment to say something and that moment never comes? Or are you smoothing things over so quickly that your own reaction never gets airtime? Now, this isn't about becoming confrontational. It's about noticing the pattern. If irritation keeps showing up later, that's usually a sign that something needed to be said. The goal isn't to speak in the heat of it. It's to let it move and then come back steady. That's very different from silence. So if you're noticing that you tend to replay conversations later on, or that irritation shows up hours after you thought something was fine, that's not random. It's also easy to miss, especially if you're someone who prides yourself on being steady and low maintenance. A lot of conflict avoidance isn't about weakness or poor communication. It's about not knowing how your emotional system actually works. Once you understand your timing, whether you need to wait for clarity or whether you're amplifying someone else's emotion, you start handling it differently. You let the wave settle, or you step back and ask, is this even mine? And then you respond from there. Now you can see how all this shows up in your chart, your solar plexus center, your authority, the places you're likely to override yourself. And when you're ready to understand your pattern more clearly, we can walk through that together in a personal reading, in a practical, real-life way. Now you can visit my website, suzannearjona.com, for more information on readings. The link is also in the show notes. Because peace isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about knowing how to move through it without abandoning yourself. So thank you for being here with me this week. I really do appreciate you listening. And if this episode resonated, share it with a friend. It helps the podcast grow, and it helps more women start building a life on their terms.